Hello, everyone. There we go. All right, just gonna do a little talking video here, pausing and looking at some areas that we missed in the last video, just supplemental to the last video. Did a little different camera view, just so we could talk about the neck, which we didn't spend much time on. But first, we can see these bulky erector spinal muscles being stretched out because so many people here like to extend. That's that leaning back we're talking about. So they're taking that spine, they're compressing it down. That's happening right here in that lower thoracic spine area. So most people are pretty strong in these muscles. And then down here in the lower sacro-iliac joint, L5, L4, we got some weakness. So we're doing things like the founder exercise. We're strengthening this area. We're using it. You know, it looks like maybe I'm using these muscles, but I'm not. I'm actually overstretching them. Not overstretching them, just stretching them. And that's why the founder exercise is such a good functional exercise, because we're strengthening the weaker areas while stretching the very tight areas that control our posture, and ultimately ending in lengthening our spine. And the other area is here in the neck. So we got the upper traps, and things like the levator, scapula attaching into the neck, all pulling that head into extension, which controls our posture usually by pushing the hips forward and furthering that extension in the lower thoracic spine, which we talk about in a lot of the later videos. The other big muscle here, you can kind of see the sides, SCM. Again, it looks like it's kind of bulging out. That's actually because it's being stretched. We're stretching that because that attaches on your mastoid process. Pulls that head into extension. So we can see how those are being stretched, because as the arms raise, the shoulders actually be driven down. So we talked about in this video the compression laterally, keeping those ball socket joints in their sockets where they belong. So all the motion we are generating in the founder should actually be from these joints. The one thing that we're really working here is the spine, but the spine isn't moving or bending in any such way. Before we start, and that's the difference between like yoga's chair pose and the founder. Because you look at them side by side, you're like, oh, these are very similar. But you'll notice the guy doing the founder has this intense, shaky look, where yoga is the more peaceful. So yoga is resting on the joints, where this founder guy is hinging at the hips, motioning at the ball socket joints, doing that unwinding as he's unraveling and lengthening his spine. And it's a very powerful move because it's just a lot going on at once. It's very intense. People who get good at this, you know, like they'll say they'll start shaking automatically. You start sweating automatically. And so just doing a couple of those throughout the day can have a dramatic impact, really help you out. So it's about saving time, which is great. But it's more about saving time as not furthering the injury. We're resting on the joints. You know, with yoga's chair pose, you'll see a lot of pressure on the knees. That's one that you can notice. The more you get better at it, you'll notice yoga's chair pose, the knees might even be out in front of the ankle, where as with the founder, it's the opposite. Those shins drive back as the hips come back. So it's hinging at the hips instead of bending at the spine, putting the pressure in the knees. That's the same thing we'll see with a lot of people just lifting, you know, just very close to what they should be. Like we're all taught bend with our knees, but there's more to it. We're going to get that hinge at the spine. If we're bending at the knees or rounding at the spine to pick up objects, the spine is taking the hit. It's lifting from a rounded position. It's going to start forming to that position. If we start lifting from a lengthened position, we're going to get stronger, and we're going to be increasing the motion at our hips, which we need to in our culture. That was the last video. We're talking about compensation motion. So if the femur is not tracking like it should, if it's not located in the joint, compressed into that joint like it should, it's going to not have full range of motion, but you still need to walk. So what happens? We get compensation motion from the sacro-iliac joint or the spine in different areas. We all kind of transfer it differently. So founder, make sure you're just motioning from the shoulder joint and the hip joint. The spine is very lengthened, and it's really all about your setup. You should feel these muscles even before you go. Let's see how I do it here. So I get very lengthened first. It should feel tough to raise your arms even before you really start hinging. And then both work together nice and slow. And maybe even before you start doing the founder, just standing there. There we go, just standing, trying to get that decompression going. You can see how that gut really sucked in. And then things like raising your arms will be tough even without the hip hinge. The arches should be working, everything like that. So let's just quickly go over some of this stuff with the posture. We'll pause where we need to. Nothing too crazy. All right, we'll start here. Now, normally I was taught in chiropractic school that when the hips go out like this, that's external rotation of the hips. If we think about it anatomically, it's actually the opposite. It's internal rotation of the hip, but that's neither here nor there. We don't need to argue about that because the femur, what we're seeing is it's rotating to external rotation. And that pushes the hips forward. Forward pelvic sway. Because usually either we're rounded and we're like, oh, we got to get rid of that rounding, so we drive our upper body back and the hips forward. I'll show that later. But we're just opening up those joints and the hips go forward. So what we need to do is when we compress, so that's bad right there, naughty, naughty, naughty. The hips are turned out, as I'm showing, forcing the hips forward. So as I turn the hips in, boom, very nice. The hip flexors engage, iliopsoas engages to turn that femur in. That's why that's such an important muscle. And it might help to widen your stance, I've noticed. In class with certain people, they want to keep their feet close together. If your feet are close together, your hip joints are actually getting pulled out of the socket more. So the wider you are, you're going to get a little more compression. It's all about compressing those in the joint. Compressing will actually help bring it more to where it should be. It's not going to bring it into internal rotation. That's actually not the goal. It's just to normalize it somewhat. That's going to help lengthen us. So while we shouldn't feel like we're hunkering down to get those in. I feel like people they're trying to get their shoulders in, they're trying to get their hips in, and they're rounding at the spine to do that. I think good posture is kind of like this compression, and that kind of feels good because you're stabilizing the joints to a point. That's why our body does that. But actually lifting and moving from a lengthened position is harder, and it's also painful. That's why we avoid it usually, is we don't want to be in pain. So our spine is good at motioning and shifting to avoid that pain. This is all off the cuff, so we're just going to review some of the things I felt like I missed, because this is important stuff. Turning in, that's that iliopsoas there. Attaches to the front of the lumbar spine, goes down to the hips, front part of the ilium. Right there, yep. So it's turning in, and you can see a little bit of lengthening that happens when I do that. And then the chest, we're kind of doing the opposite motion. So we're driving these externally, because everyone's kind of turned in the chest. So we're broadening and compressing. A lot of people confuse this with a pinching motion. And that's where that extension actually comes from. They're taking those shoulders and they're pinching, and they're actually taking their spine and compressing to get those shoulders pinched, is what I'm noticing. And those are those big bands we saw that help do that. So we want to avoid that. That's why we start with the foundation first, because once you've locked in your pelvis, you keep it that way. Then when you think about your shoulders, you won't get that extension because you'll be locked in where you should be, and then your shoulders should only motion a little bit. And what you should feel when you do that, that unraveling, is right where I showed those thick bands before. You'll feel a stretch, pretty intense, and you might even feel it in the joints too. I even noticed that like my neck is off, need a good adjustment. You can see this muscle's tighter, and you could see it a lot more when I wasn't lengthened. And it showed that how that evens out. So the other question I got in class the other day was, can this help with scoliosis? So most of our scoliosis, we actually don't know what causes it. 80% is idiopathic, which means we're idiots and we don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying somebody, I don't know. That's what's great about foundation training, because you can fix a lot of things just by addressing the spinal issues. Because if you're taking care of the thing that's encasing your nervous system, a lot of things can happen. There's going to be a lot of things you don't know that are happening that could be prevented, because prevention is amazing, because we don't know what we're actually preventing. So this is great. So little things that show up in your life, like I had random things going on in my life before I started doing this. And you're like, well, you can't point to that, but like I had trouble with an old injury, AC joint separation, injury to my feet, I could really walk, I had lots of back pain, I had this caved in chest cramp pain, I always had to pop my chest out all the time, like super painful, and my ribs, it was horrible. I thought I had good posture, I was getting adjusted all the time, like, well, it's just whatever, from an injury or something, or it's just life. And then I had immune system things, really bad digestion, I had weight gain even though I was working out all the time, running and eating well. I'm 40 pounds lighter than I was before I started this. Just sudden change. I feel like I eat worse now just because I was trying so hard to keep my weight down. But like toxic things, like I got shingles, at a pretty early age. I was like 28. Just infections, being sick all the time. All of that eliminated simply by taking stress off the nervous system. So that's why I'm adamant about this stuff. It's important. It's not just about your chiropractic care either. It's going to help a lot of areas. Just as chiropractic can help in a lot of areas, foundation training can help just as much. And it's very great when they work together. So you got the removing of the restrictions, and then you have the strengthening, keeping it in that form. So we all have these alterations. So I was on scoliosis, sorry. So if it's something for birth, then there is something actually anatomically wrong, like you have a hemivertebra, something that's off, which is only like 20%, or probably, no, it's probably way less than that. We don't see too much of that structural stuff actually throwing off the spine. Usually it's from daily life or something more neurological. It's causing the muscles to pattern. So the more we retrain our body to resist that, you might never correct like something that you have from birth, but you're going to keep it from getting worse. Just think about it. We got this, maybe say like a left scoliosis here. Gravity's going to keep pressing on that. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. So the more we resist, we're going to keep that in control. And maybe even can get eliminated over time just by pressing straight up. Okay. Usually I think we see like scoliosis, and we're like, oh, we gotta bend it the other way, bend it the other way, bend it the other way. But really resisting gravity is what we want to do. We're training those muscles to hold that in a lengthened position. I think that's really the best way to do it. And you could then, I like to work on like more unilateral exercises, getting some of that rotation out of there too, but also chiropractic is really going to be beneficial there. Just going to keep the tape rolling, see what else we can notice. Again, we can see how that rounded posture, head's in extension, that shoulder internally rotating, and the hips will be doing their own dance. So let's see how that corrects. Just showing you those muscles that pull into extension. So as we lift, we lengthen. That's what we want. Driving in, driving the shoulders down. Compression, compression. Force of lengthening. So even this can be pretty forceful decompression of the spine. Pretty tough. You can see that SCM a lot better now from the side. So that comes right on top of the clavicle. That's why it's called the SCM, sternocleidomastoid, 3 attachment points. Remember, the same nerve that goes here is the same nerve that goes to your upper traps. They're very protective, spinal accessory nerve, protecting the spine from being broken. So when you're in the sympathetic state, you are in the protected fight or flight state. Most of us in America are. So it's a, yes, it's a stress kind of environment, mentally, but what if we remove the what if it's a mechanical issue? What if you're locked mechanically in that sympathetic state that's causing it? We tend to think it's more of the egg and not the chicken, but it could have been the chicken first. It could have been mechanical stress. You're chronically in pain. There's constant stress on that nervous system. It's putting you in the sympathetic state of fight or flight. It's not actually your life that's so much doing it. We say, my life is really stressful though. But the more you are stronger mechanically, it's going to help you either way. either way it's going to work together. You can see how maybe it's being caused mechanically, but it might also be things you're doing in your life, but you'll be able to handle stress better if you're stronger, obviously. Just makes sense. You're really driving up there. So trying to do that throughout the day, especially if you're going to be walking or anything like that. Turn the hips. You can just definitely see that lengthening happening as I turn those hips in. A lot of people will drive their shoulders up, so you want to avoid that. See how I'm doing that there? They think, oh, I got to lengthen my spine. But it's really, you can feel that jamming in that back. You're actually taking that spine, you're not lengthening it. You're actually causing it to shrink by raising your shoulders. So it's the opposite that should happen. When your spine lengthens, your shoulders should drop. Why? Because we're creating distance between these two areas. That's the goal. So not raising the shoulders, driving the shoulders down, because you can see how that eliminates some of that neck stuff I got going on there. And watch your head. It's hard to tell, but you can also see my head goes back a little too much. There's that extension, so I think I correct it a little bit. Kind of driving the chin in to decompress. So these arrows are showing how that shoulders kind of get jammed into that socket where it should be compression and compression of the ball socket joints. You're using these muscles to do that. Gracilis, iliopsoas, turning those hips in. And then the opposite, the shoulders, compression down, fighting against the upper traps. Let's see what other questions I had from this video from this week. Scoliosis was the big one. Exercise. What type of exercise? We kind of went over that. Like, the difference between like the chair pose in yoga versus the founder. They're both very similar, but it's your mindset that makes the difference. How you approach it, that's going to make the difference. Life is an exercise if you want to put a label on it. It's just how you approach it. It can either be breaking you down or it can be building you up. So, a long conversation with, oh, just give me an exercise to do. It's like, I could. I mean, we could just do the founder as an exercise, or you could do your life as an exercise, but it's your approach. It's how are you carrying yourself? How are you walking? How are you moving? How are you lifting? Just changing that is enough to get you better, I believe. As long as you're not sitting all day. A lot of these people who are in more pain are actually, they are on their feet moving. And there are better ways to sit too. And then just review the videos, especially the protocol videos, to address some of those issues. Again, raising your arms is a good gauge to know if you're in a lengthened posture, because it'd be very hard to do if you are in the lengthened state. One thing you may notice is that there might be small bends in your spine happening when you raise those arms, because your spine wants to help out. It's a good helper. It likes to bend and extend to help your arms. Same thing, same idea if you're going to touch your toes, which is kind of another part of the founder. He goes down to the floor. He's trying to do all the hinging from the hips, whereas you'll notice that it's really easy to get your hands down to the ground, you're probably bending at the spine. A lot of these yoga people are very good at getting their hands flat down to the ground. You can see lots of bending happening at their spine. So it's not so much about the destination, it's about the journey. How are you getting there? And is it more intense? When I do a proper hip hinge, going down to the ground, I'll notice that I can't get to the floor, but it's harder, it's more intense. If I bend at the spine, yeah, I can get my hands almost flat on the floor. Yeah, good point. The posterior pelvic tilt we see a lot, and a lot of people like to hide it. That's one point to make. That's why it's confusing for a lot of people. They'll confuse what do they have, the posterior pelvic tilt or the anterior pelvic tilt. They can convince themselves either way. The reason we go into this, a lot of people do stand kind of like this. They have no idea. They're standing like this forward sway posture. You'll see again those bands are really tight because the hips are forward. So your femur is weighted out into your arches. People are like, oh, I have flat feet. That's why. I'm like, maybe you have flat feet because you're putting your center of gravity on your arches all day long, compressing them. You can see the hamstrings are very tight here, and the calf is in an overstretched position. So we talk about this a lot. The calf being, instead of it feels tight, but it's actually taut. It's like taking a rubber band, stretching it out. It's like, oh yeah, that's tight. And then our idea is, well, we got to stretch it more now. It's actually a lot. Sometimes Charlie horses are actually your muscle, like try to, like, for the love, take the pressure off. That's why it's cramping. Because the hamstring is actually the culprit, where we don't feel it. It's interesting. It's interesting. We don't feel the hypertonicity a lot because why do we blame the hypertonicity? It's if I'm working my bicep all the time, just curling, curling, curling. Then I go to the doctor. Oh, he's got to stretch that bicep out. That's way too tight. Or I can strengthen my tricep to catch up with it. Why do we got to blame the muscle that's doing the work? It's the guy that's not doing the work usually. That's how society is today. So you can see the hip flexor is not engaged, and we need to engage it. That's that tightening we'll see. If I do indeed correct this, let's see. A lot of people leaning back, so they're conscious about their head and their shoulders, but a lot of people have really tightness in the neck, and that's because they're constantly driving back there, and it's like, oh, your neck. So the correction, so we have that inhibited, non-engaged muscles. We have to tighten it. So we have that switch almost. It's almost reversing what we had before. Ourselves into more of length and flexion posture. So these are the 2 points, ASIS and the PSIS. Pretty level as far as I can tell there. Normal actually is slightly anterior. So if you're palpating those 2 bony prominences, slight anterior. If it's level, you might actually be a posterior tilt. You'll know because there'll be a flattening of this low back. But make sure you're lined up first. Make sure your ear, your shoulder, your hip, and your ankle are all generally in a straight line. You don't want to look at your hips and see them out here. And you don't want to look at the hips and see them in front of the shoulders. So we're checking there at that point. And the best way, because you can convince yourself either way, I like to get myself really lengthened and then just with the pelvis. You'll notice that it's just like that little bit of a motion, tilting that pelvis. And what you may notice is, oh man, it's really hard. It's really hard to go into anterior tilt. That shows you probably got a lot of hamstring tension. And if it's, okay, that's easy, going posterior, okay, then I probably have a tendency to be posterior. Make sure you're really lengthened. Get that good standing foundation posture first, where you feel that tension, and then just isolate that pelvis. That pelvis is not going to have a whole ton of motion there. You'll see that your spine will want to bend, or you want to compress around, or tuck your tailbone in, and that's going to confuse you. And it's actually a great exercise. So what is harder to do? Is it harder to go into anterior, or is it harder to go into posterior? That's going to tell you a lot more than dancing in the mirror, trying to figure out which way it's tilted. And again, it's not as big of a deal. It's more about strengthening your spine. Notice that when I do lengthen, my pelvis kind of corrects itself. Kind of brings it to right where it should be, that nice, slight, maybe 10 degrees. You see how a lot of people do that? They compress. What I'm showing, my spine compresses. They want to tuck that tailbone in all the time. And that's never what you should be doing. You should never feel like you're getting shorter. It should always be lengthening, going up. And that pelvis tilts right to where it should be. And then I'm good for walking. I want to walk in this because this is a hip flexor dominant position. I want to exercise in this position because it's hip flexor dominant position. And it's going to remove the sitting hamstring problem. And also these hip flexors just don't get enough love. I've talked about that a lot in my videos, how that muscle just isn't used because of the heels in our shoes and the way we walk. And that's about all I got to say about that. You can even see some, I don't know if that's just the lighting. I'm assuming there is some curvature because you get to see it in the neck. I think it was right after the gym, so I probably could use a nice little adjustment there. Even that almost looks better when I backed up, so it might have just been more a little bit of the lighting, but you can't see it's off in the shoulders, but almost like it gets eliminated. You can see a little bit. The more I lengthen, just showing you opening up those joints, stretching that, opening up here, and the suboccipital, very important. All right, guys. Hope it helped.